Hey, fellow Wanderers, Noam here. I won't stand between you and all of the amazing wondering that's about to take place, and I wouldn't interrupt your listening if I didn't have something really important to share. Well, I do. I want to tell you about a very important fundraiser that's going on until December 31st. Without donors like you, we literally would not be able to do the work that we do or grow in the way that our audiences need us to. Which is why we're asking you, our loyal listeners, to help support our podcast expansion project. I'm talking more episodes in both audio and video formats, more special guests, live events. We're kicking off this plan with my other podcast, Unpacking Israeli History, and we have big things in store. So for the month of December, we're hoping to raise around $150,000 to bring this vision of real expansion to reality. Visit JewishUnpacked.com/support before December 31st to partner on this incredible opportunity. JewishUnpacked.com/support. We're even offering some really cool swag if you donate above $500. It's really cool. If you've already donated, you're the best. We thank you. If not, now's your chance. And we'd be so grateful. It would mean so much. JewishUnpacked.com/support. Now on to the show. Do you view this then as, to an extent, a civil war between Jews and Jews or no?
That's a complicated question. I think there's a distinction between Jews fighting each other and between one part of the Jewish people allying itself with what I would call is the political enemies of the Jews. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Yes. It's too simple to say it's Jew versus Jew. It was Jew versus Greek Empire, and there were Jews that sided with the Greek Empire. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Wondering Jews with Mijal and Noam.
I'm Mijal.
And I'm Noam, and this podcast is our way of trying to figure out the Jewish world. We do not have it all figured out, but we try to figure out some big items together.
As we always say, we really do love to hear from you, so please email us at WonderingJews@JewishUnpacked.com and call us at 833-WON-JEWS.
Okay, before we dive in, and I'm really excited to go through our conversation today about such a fascinating holiday, about Hanukkah, but we got a listener question, and the question is, what is your favorite Hanukkah song? What is your favorite Hanukkah song? Let's go back and forth here with different Hanukkah songs of the top Hanukkah songs. Go.
You're putting me in the spot. I'm thinking right now like Yemei Hanukkah. I don't know the name of it. Chanukah Miktashenu Bashir U'Basimcha, something. Laila Vayom, like night and day we'll do the dreidel, Sofganiyot, Nochal Bo Larov. It's an Israeli song, Noam.
Can I play you my favorite?
Oh, you're ready for this?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm ready. Ready for this? This is it. Ready? We're gonna go back.
Is it like dreidel, dreidel, dreidel?
Here comes Hanukkah.
Yeah, you know this one?
Is this like the Adam Sandler one?
That's one.
Okay, you are such an American Jew.
Okay, fine. Speaking of American Jew, shout out to my dear friend Noe Jacobson. If you haven't listened to Defying Gravity, have you seen Wicked, Mijal?
Confession. I bought tickets with my husband and my sister, and then we found out it was 2 hours and 40 minutes.
No, you can't do that.
Nope.
You cannot do that. There's no way you're doing that.
Whatever. Have you watched it, Noam?
I have not watched it. So I was a hero one Sunday, and I was with my baby daughter while she napped, and my wife and 3 kids went to go see Wicked together. So
that's so nice.
Not all heroes wear capes. Yes, that's true. But listen to this one. Ready?
Some things have changed around us. Some things have stayed.
This is Maccabees, Defying Gravity.
Through every
Do you like it?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like my closest friend, besides you, Noe Jacobson.
I feel like some competition here. Yeah, I can't sing like that. That's why.
There's so many Hanukkah songs.
Yeah, it's funny though, by the way, most of the ones that like I know are Israeli songs.
Ready for this? I love it.
I also love, do you know Kad Katan? It's like a little jar, like, you know?
Yeah.
My kids love it. It's a very powerful song that just describes a little jar of oil.
Why does it mean a lot to you?
I think a lot of these songs mean a lot because I grew up with them.
Yeah.
So there's always this like childhood memories, but the words are beautiful. Like you're walking around talking about how there was like a tiny jar of oil that was able to overcome everything and last for 8 days. Or Banu Choshech Legaresh. Like those words are so poignant.
Translate that.
Yeah, it literally means we have come to dispel, to
drive out.
to drive out, to expel darkness. And like wow, that's like a mission statement of what this holiday is. It's beautiful.
I love that. Mission statement of the holiday by Kat Katan. Speaking of mission statements of the holiday, I want to talk so much about this holiday of Hanukkah with you, and I want to just explore it with you. It's a fascinating holiday because I'm going to read some stats for you. 2/3 of American Jews, 68%, view Hanukkah as one of the 3 most important holidays. What I find interesting about that is that Hanukkah is the only major Jewish holiday that's not mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. It is mentioned in the Old Testament according to the canon of the church, but according to Judaism, it's not in our 24 books of the Hebrew Bible. But it's really interesting that Hanukkah is this incredibly celebrated holiday. Incredibly celebrated. It's pervasive. And what I want to talk about with you today, Mijal, is why do American Jews or Western Jews, why do we love it so much? Why is it such a transformational holiday such that almost 70% of American Jews are celebrating it? That's more than every other holiday except for like 2, except for like Passover and I think Yom Kippur or something. Like, what is going on?
We can go there like one step further and say, why is it that liberal Jews love Hanukkah so much, being that the historical narrative of Hanukkah is actually one that in many ways could be seen as unpalatable for liberal values?
You're explaining the question much clearer, which is there seems to be a contradiction.
Yes.
In many ways.
Yes.
So then how do we explore that?
Let me take another step back though, and first say the following. When we talk about like Jewish holidays and things that happened in the past, there's always going to be debate and discussion about what happened, and there's always going to be different sources. So I could turn to the Torah, my sacred text, and be like, what happened when the Jews left Egypt? I'm going to get one answer there. I could also turn to archaeological sources and say, what evidence exists for this event? Right? So I'm first naming that part of what we need to uncover here is the different sources and discussions that happen in Hanukkah. So I want us to start off by telling almost like 2 narratives of the Hanukkah story. Yeah, even before we get to the question, is that okay?
Yeah, and I just want to remind everyone who is thinking about the concept of multiple narratives of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that such a thing exists throughout the history of the Jewish people, that there are multiple narratives of our story. So let's hear the 2 different narratives. Let's do it.
I'm going to start with the narrative that I grew up with, and I'm not sure, Noam, how you grew up with this. But when I went to Jewish day school, grew up in a religious home, and when I learned about Hanukkah, it was like, this was the story, and I'm being a little bit simplistic, but I'm just going to say it. It was the Jews were conquered by this big Greek empire that tried to shove Greek thought and culture down the Jews' throat and to assimilate them forcibly. The Jews fought back, a small group of Jews against a great, mighty Greek empire. The Jews won. They went to the temple, which was their main place of worship. They needed to light the menorah, the candelabra. They only have a little bit of oil, pretty much for one night. But miracle of miracles happens. They light, and it continues. They're able to light for 8 days, which is the amount of time it takes them to supervise and produce more sacred oil to continue the lights in the temple. And that's how I grew up, celebrating this amazing, amazing story of Hanukkah. So first of all, Noam, how does this compare to how you grew up learning about the story?
Spot on. The only thing I would add is it was the mighty lost to the hands of the weak. Just that being like a constant refrain there. Besides that, yeah, that's the story. That's the story that I heard growing up. And I think maybe like the crucive oil tradition of like, that was like very like, if I say to my kids right now, hey, why are we celebrating Hanukkah? I think they'll say, because the oil lasted for 8 days. And you're like, okay, great. Is that's what we're celebrating? Then you have to, they're like, yeah, but can we just get the gifts already?
Sorry, total tangent. But when I was growing up, my parents actually were like, we are not giving you gifts because that is way too assimilated. And it's like around Christmas and we actually want to be whatever. But my kids get gifts now. Something
that my parents have instilled in me, which I like to do when I do it well, it's great, is that experiences are so much more valuable than things. So the gifts that we want to be giving are our experiences, though one of my daughters, Leon, is hilarious. She wrote this list of all the things that she wants. One of the things that she requested, this is just hilarious, is a Shabbat light in her room. It means a Shabbat light, just this is in the weeds.
There's like a mechanical cover that allows you to kind of like turn it on and off without violating the traditional law against using electricity on the Sabbath.
That was so well said. That's
Thank you
exactly
very
what it
much.
is. I like this. I like the setup. That's the traditional story that kids get in Jewish schools. Okay. What's the more adult story? What's the more mature story of Hanukkah?
Well, the more mature story, and I will say here right now that I'm a religious Jew who looks to my traditional text as my source of wisdom. So what I'm going to share now are not things that contradict the way that I approach the holiday. I think they were just things that were mostly left out, if that makes sense, of that more, simple maybe way of thinking about it. So the story of Hanukkah is one in which Jews are basically conquered by the Greek Empire. Alexander the Great conquers large portions, including Judea, in the 4th century BCE. By the way, Jews are living like all over the Greek Empire. They don't only live in the land of Israel. And even as they have a temple, they now are under like imperial control. And at the beginning, okay, things are kind of okay. Like you're part of this like empire. There's some laws, but there's also some tolerance, and we don't have like the massive rebellions that characterize the story of Hanukkah. What happens is that the Greek Empire is split into three. The Seleucid Greeks take over the part that includes Judea. And here we have a little bit of like a shift in Greek imperial strategy towards the Jews. Because now there's all of these decrees that are passed, which are in essence meant to negate aspects of what I'm using contemporary language. They wouldn't call it like Judaism. They would call it like ancestral law, but that are meant to actually forbid Jews from practicing what we would call today Judaism.
Right.
So this includes things from no keeping Shabbat, no doing circumcision, no learning sacred texts, being forced to offer sacrifices to like pagan idols and like things like that. Now, part of what makes this story complicated, Noam, is that this is not just like this bad guy coming from the outside and saying, stop being Jewish and do all these things. Greek civilization is seen as like the most elegant, supreme, sophisticated, moral, enlightened civilization of the time. And Greeks look at these provincial Jews and they think of them as tremendously backwards and like almost like engaging in ways that are immoral. And there's actually a lot of Jews who agree with this way of thinking about what we would call today Judaism. So there's a lot of Jews who begin, in Hebrew we would call them today Mityavnim. Okay, Yavan is the word for Greece. So Mityavnim are those who become like the Greeks. And this was not, we often use the word like assimilation for people who begin taking on the customs. I would say it's not just the way we think of assimilation today. It's assimilating into an imperial culture that is determined to outlaw Judaism, right? That almost becomes like a political enemy. Okay, so then we begin to have these decrees enforced over Judea. These are not like enforced. It's not like the story of Purim where Haman, just different holiday, right? Where Haman's like, this is about all the Jews in the Persian Empire. This is just for the Jews living in Judea.
And I just want to interrupt just to remind people, because I forget this all the time, that the story of Purim happens before the story of Hanukkah.
Yeah.
It's a fun question to ask people to see which comes first. But Purim and the Persian Empire, that took place during the time where there was between Beit HaMikdash number 1, the Temple number 1, and Beit HaMikdash number 2. But now we're in the Greek dynasty, and we're a couple hundred years later, Second Temple. Okay.
Yeah. So there's two books actually called like 1 Maccabees, 2 Maccabees, like two books that basically recount what happened here. Neither of them are like historical accounts the way that we think of history today. And they're also like written later, and we have like translations of them. So we don't treat them as like, perfect historical books the way that in 2024 we think of history. But part of the accounts that they give is that this imposition of forbidding Jewish practice and imposing certain what we might call like Greek practice begins to like spread until it comes to the city called Modi'in. And there, again, according to the story, we have one man, Matityahu, who's a priest. And he is being told that he has to participate in this kind of cultic worship. And he's confronted not just with Greeks, but with Mityavnim as well. And he, who's the father of 5 sons, essentially becomes a public dissenter, right? And basically saying he doesn't want to do this. And he and his family becomes guerrilla fighters who like basically go into the mountains with their families and they take on their Greek rulers in addition to the Jews that are mityavnim, that are basically helping the Greek enemies, what I'm going to call as a descendant of, rabbinic Jews, the Greek enemies.
Do you view this then as, to an extent, a civil war between Jews and Jews or no?
That's a complicated question. I think there's a distinction between Jews fighting each other and between one part of the Jewish people allying itself with what I would call is the political enemies of the Jews. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Yes. It's too simple to say it's Jew versus Jew. It was Jew versus Greek Empire, and there were Jews that sided with the Greek Empire.
Yes, but you also see my biases here. Let's just name this here. I have biases, right? I see myself as descending from the tradition that came from that. There's people who point out the brutality of what this looked like. Dr. Malka Simkovich, I've learned a lot from her about the story of Hanukkah, but there's accounts of Matityahu basically forcing grown adult Jews to submit to circumcision, right? Yeah. Not the most palatable holiday that we're celebrating.
So now you're pointing to the contradiction. But let's, or maybe I just heard it, but could you say it more like in Mijal Bitton, like direct? Like, what's the contradiction? What do you see as like the interesting intellectual contradiction here?
Well, number one, I think I'm using liberal very broadly, okay? Liberals in 2024 would look at the Maccabees and think, oh my gosh, religious fanatics who were willing to both die and kill for their religion, okay? So it's one big area of questions, about how Hanukkah is so popular. And then there's something else that maybe begins answering the question, but it's in itself another question, which is there is a huge distinction between how we grew up learning of this story and the story that we just discussed, which is
the cruse of oil tradition.
Yes.
Yes, I'm a good student.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you. No, that's pretty major. We learned about that in later sources. It's the most famous one is in the Talmud that basically asks my Hanukkah, what happened? What are we celebrating? Yeah. And it talks about this little, what do you call it? Cruse
of oil. By the way, it's the only context in which I ever use the word cruse.
Yeah, I say jar. Is that wrong?
That's the more normal way to say it. Yes.
Okay. So actually, that's when we learn about this little jar of oil that illuminated that the Maccabees were able to light up. So I don't know if it's a paradox or an absence or a question of what is the relationship between how we celebrate the holiday today. And let me make something clear. Even though we are diverse, so let's just say there's Orthodox Jews and Reform Jews and religious Jews and secular Jews. Jews today, we have as our framework Rabbinic Judaism.
Some people don't like the term Rabbinic Judaism, by the way.
Who doesn't like it?
Because it makes it sound like there are other kinds of Judaism that are therefore legitimate, meaning there's Rabbinic Judaism, there's Jew for Jesus Judaism. There's as though you're giving an adjective to describe Judaism as it exists right now, as opposed to just calling it Judaism. Which is, you're historically calling it an outgrowth of the rabbinic group as opposed to the Essenim, as opposed to the Zealots, as opposed to the Sadducees, as opposed to the Sicarii, whatever the groups are. And that's the end of the Second Temple period. But to say that it's rabbinic Judaism means that this is, again, I am literally speaking for them, not for me right now, but that it's not authentic Judaism.
We can use the words that we use in every day, or we can be a little bit academic. This is not the hill I'm going to die on, basically. No.
I am so with you on that. But yeah, okay, fine. I felt like I had to represent them for a second, and I did it, and now I'm almost regretting it.
No, what I meant is that even all of us from, it doesn't matter how diverse we are, all denominations, all groups, celebrate with lighting candles and with talking about the cruse of oil. So this is something that is a question for kind of all Jews, that we have inherited a story and a practice that, by the way, is beautiful and stunning and transcendent, and that there's some questions about how it is similar and different from some of the earlier sources about what happened historically.
Okay. I'm with you. I get the contradiction. And something that you didn't say, but I'm going to say the subtext of something that you didn't say is the jar. See what I did there? Not cruse. The jar of oil tradition is not in the historical records. and as far as we know, meaning it's not part of the conversation until the Talmud brings it up in the 5th, 6th century and mentions it in Tractate Shabbat, like you're talking about.
There might have been some earlier hints to it, like the holiday was known as the Holiday of Lights earlier. But I think there's some questions. Now, again, let me just say something. I am wholly uninterested in like the exercise of going around and saying all of these things that I grew up in are not true or like not true academically.
You're not trying to be the Grinch over here.
It's not just the Grinch. I actually am a traditional Jew and I have reverence for the traditions I received. But what I find fascinating and what I've been thinking about for a while is like Hanukkah is one example. It's not the only one, but it is one example of tradition that changed over time. And one of the main changes is that it's a holiday that commemorates something that happened during the Second Temple. And meanwhile, the practice really becomes widespread and understood to be around the cruise of oil during diasporic times when Jews are like not in Israel with a temple anymore. So it's one of those transformations.
Why did it change from a military battle to a focus on the jar of oil tradition?
Right. And we can ask this question. It's almost like I wear two hats. I can ask it as an academic who will say a shift from like the truth based on the historical record, even though it's not perfect, you know what I mean? And a more like religious practice. Or I can ask it as a religious Jew and say, I'm not even saying which one is like true versus not true with a capital T. I'm just saying we first were really focused on like this military battle, and then we really privileged this spiritual miracle around the oil and the light. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But then to complicate it, the prayer that we insert into our prayers when we talk about Hanukkah is called Al Hanisim, and it doesn't mention the tradition of oil tradition. It doesn't mention that at all. It just talks about the military battle. So there are these multiple narratives going on about the story of Hanukkah and what it is that we are really celebrating.
By the way, there's like all of these ways that we can think about this shift. So like one reason given for it is that, like think about it in like very like almost like logical terms. When the rabbis are writing about Hanukkah, they are writing as like a vulnerable diasporic community. So like imagine them like going out there being like, let's celebrate our rebellion against the Greek Empire and the way we fought them and overthrew them. Yeah, like they are living under Roman rule and like they are not living like in the most confident and comfortable time ever. So like there is a very like natural understanding of why it is that they would like downplay the military rebellion, small against the many aspect, and instead be like their spiritual glory here.
Very reasonable political decision. Very reasonable.
Yeah. And by the way, another thing to know, by the way, and this, whenever I teach this in like more traditional circles and I share this, I always feel very guilty because I feel like I'm taking like a happy, beautiful, innocent story and then like, the Maccabees who fight the Greeks and who are like the heroes of most Jewish kids, they end up creating a dynasty called the Hasmonean, the Hashmonaim, right? And they are not super great. Like they end up becoming pretty corrupt over time. Many of the rulers end up, adopting Greek ways themselves and oppressing other Jews. They also violate there's like a principle in Jewish tradition that anachronistically, we can call it the separation of church and state. Yep. But they end up as priests becoming kings as well, which is like a big, massive violation. And to make it even like much, much worse, it is two Greek princes, brothers who are fighting over who gets to rule Jerusalem, who pretty much end up inviting Rome to take over. So like there's like a lot of bad things that happen with this dynasty. So another way to think about it is that the rabbis don't want to maybe emphasize, like, I don't know if I want to say this so conclusively.
Say your non-conclusion conclusion.
My non-conclusive conclusive is that there's something very powerful about highlighting the spiritual miracle in a way that doesn't necessarily tie it to some of the more difficult parts of the story. Yes,
that tracks. I'll just add one little piece here. When you think of the different ways that people have celebrated Hanukkah over the years, like we're thinking about the mindset of the early rabbis in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century CE, how they relate to military success and relate to their diasporic relationship with the empire of the day. The exact opposite was taking place with early Zionists in the early 20th century, when their whole frame of reference is not the cruise of oil, and they actually don't really care so much about thinking in a diasporic sort of way about being subservient to the government, to subservient to non-Jews. And they created poetry, and we sang one of them earlier, Menashe Ravina, who wrote the song of Mi Yimelech V'Rot Yisrael, who can recount the mighty acts of the people of Israel, who can count them in every generation. He says, a hero arises, redeemer of the people, right? And he doesn't mention God, actually takes away God, because it's a play on the words from Psalms, from Tehillim, which says, who can recount the mighty acts of the Lord, recite all his praises. And he actually removes that line. He takes that line and changes it from the acts of the Lord to, in every generation, a hero arises, a person. And the whole idea in early Zionist thought, and same with Aaron Ze'ev in Pirchei Bar, which is about wildflowers, he mentions specifically, and he says, no miracle happened for us. He says, no cruse of oil did we find. We walked through the valley, ascended the mountain. And it's the story of the might of the individual to overcome the authorities, overcome the imperial peoples at this point in time, whether or not that's the Ottomans or the Brits. But that's the story of the early Zionists, and that's how they saw Hanukkah as a mirror for their experience. And so they focus on that. And that's totally different.
Yeah, well, I think, Noam, part of what you're getting into is that Hanukkah, or Hanukkah, that it has so many layers that
Yes.
it actually has, like, we can right now offer 5 visions. Like right before, like the
Do
mission
it.
statement of Hanukkah, right?
Do
What
5
darkness are we
visions.
expelling?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Hanukkah, and I didn't, like, I'm just saying this. Like, so
Vision number 1.
Hanukkah can be what you just mentioned, like a celebration of human might. And I would add that to a celebration of Jewish sovereignty and military strength, right? So
Okay,
there's like...
on that point, I want to give a rabbinic source for it. I would say Maimonides is a rabbinic source for it. When he writes what we're celebrating,
sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. Sovereignty. That's
Yep.
what he talks about. And he's well aware of the history of what the Hasmoneans did.
Yep.
He had a pretty mature understanding of the
Correct.
story. And he
Correct.
still focuses on the sovereignty. And it doesn't matter that it was short-lived or it was a couple hundred years. It's the celebration of sovereignty.
Correct. It's sovereignty and like also a reclaiming of the Jew as someone who can fight.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? It's sovereignty that we can fight for.
Yeah.
And so in many ways, Hanukkah
I
is
don't
like
know
a
why I'm
Zionist
writing
holiday.
this down, but I'm writing this down. So I'm just telling you.
Okay, so that's like one version of the holiday. Another version of the holiday is, I would say, like a holiday about spiritual might, right? Which is not necessarily like, fighting with weapons, but the whole idea of like the oil and like the light that comes out and thinking about the supernatural aspect of that light continuing. Is like so many of the teachings around that look at the light and think of it as like spiritual strength. Right? So Rav Kook, for example, who was, you can give me the dates when he lived, Noam?
He died in 1935.
When was he born, though? Just kidding.
I can't remember. I'm sorry.
No, oh my gosh, you failed.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Okay. But anyways, like he compares people to candles. And for him, part of the message of Hanukkah is what it means to spread light in the world. And that's like a spiritual...
Okay, so this is a quote from Rav Kook that it's on my desk. The purely righteous do not complain about the dark, but increase the light. They do not complain of evil, but increase justice. They do not complain of heresy, but increase faith. They do not complain of ignorance, but increase wisdom. Shine a light sent this to
Beautiful.
me. So nice of them. But that's it.
Beautiful. But I think that encapsulates thinking of Hanukkah as this holiday of spiritual might. And spiritual might is divorced of context. Like you can be spiritually mighty whether you're sovereign or whether you're a minority, whether you're like winning or losing. Like their spiritual strength has that ability to be everywhere. Like we can dispel darkness everywhere in that place. So first one is sovereignty, military might. Second one is spiritual strength and prowess and courage. Third one, like a third version of Hanukkah, is all about Jewish pride, right? Anti-assimilation, if you want to call it.
Right.
So today, I think we're all used to this like massive Hanukkah menorahs lit in very public places. That was not widespread or common before the Lubavitcher Rebbe initiated it, and he even had to like fight court battles to be allowed to do so. And part of what he wrote regarding that, why was he so insistent, is he said, this helps us with Jewish pride, reminding us of who we are. So if you think about the aspects of Hanukkah that are about insisting on the dignity of our Judaism in light of the demands of empire, let's say, that's another version of Hanukkah that it's very much about Jewish identity, Jewish pride. Okay, so that's 3 versions.
I like it.
A 4th one is the one that I think became popular in America.
Yeah.
And it's like a weird one, which I think in America, Hanukkah is seen as a holiday of religious freedom. Have you heard that before?
Well, it makes sense. It's the ability for the Jewish people to do circumcision, to observe Shabbat, to study sacred texts.
Right, I know. So it does make sense. It makes sense when you take away the fact that the Maccabees were forcing Mityavni Jews to.
Okay, right.
You know what I mean?
That's
it's like religious freedom for me, away from the Greeks, and not for you.
Okay, yes, but the ability for the Jewish practice to be observed.
Yeah, I forgot the 5th one. Maybe the 5th one is like Hanukkah as like a more commercialized version of Christmas. Like Hanukkah just happens to fall at the same or similar time as Christmas.
Yeah, this year it's the exact same time.
Right, that's the same or similar. And the lights are pretty like malleable in the sense that like, do you get what I'm saying? Like,
the irony of that last point is that the Hanukkah celebration takes place in the U.S. could very well be taking place in the U.S. more than any others, because the assimilation opportunities when kids are seeing Christmas being celebrated everywhere. And this is the Jewish antidote, or the Jewish opportunity to engage in something spiritual, is to say, no, let's take Hanukkah incredibly seriously, because we see the commercialization and consumerism that takes place around Christmas. Well, you know what? If that's the game and that's what's being played, then we have to play the game too.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Now, some people might be like, well, but what's the one way to think about Hanukkah? Or like, what's the authentic way? And I actually find I'm not only comfortable, I actually love the fact that Hanukkah has all these layers. Like, I love the fact that I can think about Zionism and military strength, and think about, like, I kept thinking about how in our liturgy we use the word miracle. Like the prayer that you mentioned, we use the word miracle for the Maccabees battles. And then I was thinking, maybe writers who are writing about this time period and like what happened with the pagers, with Hezbollah fighters, you know what I mean? Yeah. Maybe they will write and they will say miracles happen. And because we are living in it, we are not recognizing the absolute extraordinary gifts that we are receiving. And I love having that, and also having the spiritual aspect. And like, I personally, does that resonate, or am I just
Absolutely. No, that's exactly what it is. I like anything with layers.
Cake. I was going to go into cake metaphors.
No, you're going to talk about food all of a sudden.
But no, let me just ask you, how are you going into Hanukkah this year with all of these layers and all of these messages?
I gotta be real with you. I love this is like the early Zionist in me. I love the aspect of what they were fighting. I love it. And I get so jazzed by it every year. What we basically just spoke about was there are 2 different reasons. Well, there are 4 different reasons, or maybe 5 different reasons why Hanukkah is layered. And we see the 2 different reasons for the American experience. It's this opportunity to assert religious freedom in many ways, or it's this opportunity to assert this religious identity in many ways. And it's when you view Judaism as a religion that you're able to see that. And then in Israel, there is Judaism not as much as a religion, though it's also that, but Judaism as a people, as a nationality, as this identification with the Maccabees asserting sovereignty. I'm an American, but I resonate more with that one. Because I just want to go over this fascinating and simple halakha Jewish law that just showcases the distinction between the 2. In Israel versus America, the way you're supposed to ideally light your menorah, it's really supposed to be outside. It's really supposed to be outside the front door.
We do that, by the way. My parents do it.
Well, that tracks that your parents do that, but most people don't. And in Israel, that's what they do. They put the menorah outside. They put the menorah in a place where it's supposed to go. It's typically in a glass box. It attracts more attention than lighting inside. And that's the whole idea of Hanukkah, which is to be lefarsem et hanes, to publicize the miracle. And I think that the miracle is, in this case, the miracle of Jewish sovereignty, the miracle of the ability of 1,800 years to lack agency, to lack the ability to to self-determine and to do that. But in the diaspora, we don't do that. And the reason we don't do that is because the Talmud says that in times of danger, you could place it on a table and that's sufficient, and do it indoors. And just thinking about the distinction between how Israelis light the Hanukkah candles outside versus how we in the diaspora light it, which is typically, not your family, but typically. So I think it would be an amazing statement of national identity that says, this is who I am. Yes, I'm part of a religion, but I'm really part of a people. I'm part of Am Yisrael. I'm part of the Jewish people. And I feel that this year, more than any other, probably because we tend to forget that 10/7 happened just a year ago. The Hanukkah that was experienced right after 10/7 was like we were in shock, we were in trauma. But the year of reaction to 10/7 was the year of 2024. And that was the year that I hope will forever be remembered, that the Jewish people solidified more and more as a people, regardless of what your religious behavior is, my religious behavior. We're part of one people. We're part of one story. We're part of one history. We're part of one future. We're part of one fate. We're part of one destiny. And that's the way I'm going in this year, feeling that very heavily, feeling that in a very meaningful way. And so, ironically, I feel like a religious obligation to continue the tradition of Menashe Ravina that I mentioned earlier, and Aaron Ze'ev, who I mentioned earlier, about the poetry that they wrote. I feel this religious obligation to carry on that national tradition.
It's beautiful.
So that's what I'm going in with. What are you going in with?
I am really taken. Like theologically, I think a lot about what we mean when we say miracle. You know, I have a son named Ness. You have a daughter named Nisa, right?
Seems to be a theme.
There is a theme. Well, mine is named after my father-in-law, so I didn't have so much creativity there, but that's for a different time. I think my favorite idea for Hanukkah has always been that the miracle wasn't so much that the oil lasted for 8 days. It was that this group of warriors decided to try lighting a menorah with oil that was not supposed to last for 8 days. Right? Like that human, and I would say here, like Jewish, okay, approach of saying, we are going to go for it.
We're going for it.
It makes no sense in reality. We are the few. There's not enough oil. You know, we are going to like resist the seduction of what's possible and instead fight for, you know, for our dreams. And to me, that the partnership between us and God, being a warrior and taking risks and then like praying and hoping that God delivers us, that to me is at the heart of Hanukkah. And Noam, I don't know when this, what the news will be like when this episode is released, but I know for me and for so many of us to have hostages back home, you know, I think that's all I keep thinking about is like, what will Hanukkah look like this year? And are we going to be able to breathe a little bit easier knowing that some of them have come home? So that's part of the miracle that involves human and divine covenantal partnership that I think we're all praying for. Yep.
Well, Mijal, I hope you have a meaningful Hanukkah.
A happy Hanukkah.
A happy Hanukkah.
With
a happy
presents,
Hanukkah,
with food, with chocolate.
All the things.
And by the way, even if I know like the history, like I've studied this history a bunch and it's different than how I grew up, I love celebrating it exactly how I grew up.
Yeah. If you could have a mature understanding of it, but a childish emotional appreciation for it, that is the win.
That is the win. Okay. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Wondering Jews with Mijal and Noam is a production of Unpacked, a division of OpenDor Media.
Subscribe to Wondering Jews wherever you're listening to this pod and follow Unpacked at all the social media places. Just look for @Jewish Unpacked. Most of all, be in touch. Write to us at WonderingJews at JewishUnpacked.com. That's WonderingJews, WonderingJews at JewishUnpacked.com.
This episode was hosted by me, Michal Biton.
And me, Noam Weissman.
Hona Dodge is our researcher, Rob Pera is our audio editor, and we are produced by Rivka Stern.
Hey everybody, it's Elon Gold. Let's be honest, who doesn't need a good laugh right now? Oh, I know I do. Well, That's why I'm excited to invite you to my new podcast, Stars of David with Elon Gold. Join me and my co-host, the wonderful, the hilarious Eli Leonard, on Stars of David to dive into all the joys and, yes, quirks of Jewish life, together with some amazing, very special guests. Whether you need a laugh, a little kvetch, or some heartfelt conversations, Stars of David has you covered. Subscribe now to Stars of David wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube at Unpacked Podcasts.